What's up everybody? It's Travis here from Travis.media. So about a year ago, I decided to look into this thing called Docker. And at that time, I just wasn't ready for it. Pulled up the documentation, there were images, there were containers, there were volumes, there was Docker Compose. I tried to make sense of it, but I just couldn't. I just wasn't there yet in my journey. I even did like a Docker pull and pulled down a couple of images. And then I was like, where's my image? I can't find my image. And then finally, I ran the command to show my images, but it's like, what do I do with these images? So I ditched it. Then a couple months later, I started a job that used Docker, and I had to learn it. So over the past year, I've been using Docker, especially in the current job that I'm in. We use it daily. So I thought now would be a good time to revisit me a year ago. So here's my intentions with this video. I want to give you a quick overview of Docker. Like, what is a container? What is an image? High-level overview of the definitions, as if you were me a year ago, like just confused on all of these things. I want to give you a high-level overview, and then I want to take those definitions and turn practical and build some images with you to show you exactly how it goes down. So I'm going to take this React app and I'm going to Dockerize it. We're going to take a WordPress theme. We're going to Dockerize it using Docker Compose. And by the end of this video, you're going to feel at least better about Docker than you did starting the video. I find that when first learning something new, it's good to get a high-level overview and not all of this in-depth stuff that you can learn later. So that's my intentions in this video. So let's get started. All right, so before we get started, as always, if you're into web development, coding, if you're learning to code, you want to land that new job, or you just want some tips on conquering life in general, consider hitting that subscribe button below. Lots of great videos are on the way for 2020. So as I stated at the beginning, part one of this video is going to be a quick rundown of definitions. That's what I'm getting into now, and then we'll get to the practical later. So here we go. Docker, simply put, is container management software. So you have containers, you have images, you have volumes. How do you manage it all? Well, that's what Docker's for. What is an image? An image, I like to think of it as a blueprint of your container. So it's the instructions for building your container. I can take that image, hand that image to you, you can run build on it and have the exact same setup, dependencies and all, that I have. Another way to look at it, it's a snapshot of your container, and it's made up of layers. So an image is made up of layers. So you have a base layer, which would be like Debian or Ubuntu or something like that. Then you add another layer, like maybe your software files. Then you add another layer, like some dependencies. And then another layer, maybe some configurations or something. But anyway, the image is made up of layers. So you start with a base, you add something on it, you add something on it, you add something on it, boom. When you build it out, you get a container. So just think of it as the blueprint for building your container. And we'll look at that practically in a minute. So containers are ready to roll applications from Docker images. Another way to look at it, a container is a running instance of a Docker image. So you have your blueprint. When your blueprint is run, it is a container. So what's the benefit? Here's 4 things. Number 1, simplicity. It's an easy install. I can hand you the image, you can run it, and have the exact same container running as me. Next is collaboration, which is kind of the same thing. Multiple devs can work on it and not have to worry about having differences in dependencies and binaries and things like that. Next is flexibility. You can build it with whatever you want. It's a container, you put in it whatever you want. And finally, totality. So if you give me a WordPress site, I might have a different version of MySQL, or a different version of PHP, or a different version of WordPress. I might be building it and setting it up with different dependencies or binaries that you may have. The good thing about a container is that it contains everything you need to run that application. So when I hand it to you, when you run it, it has all of the same versions and everything that I have. All right, so here's the big question that confuses everybody. I'm going to keep this brief. I'm going to try to give you a broad difference instead of getting in depth. If you want to get in depth, there's tons of great articles out there with charts and diagrams and all this other stuff for you to fully understand it. But here's the quick and easy. You have VMs, virtual machines, and containers. What's the difference? Well, a virtual machine has a complete operating system on it. So each virtual machine has a complete operating system on it. So imagine a computer. You have hardware on your computer, you have an operating system, and then jump up here, you have these virtual machines that you've set up. Each instance of a virtual machine has a complete operating system on it. And the thing you should note here is that the hardware for these virtual machines is virtualized. So these virtual machines use the underlying hardware of that system or server through this software called a hypervisor. So again, each virtual machine has a complete operating system and dependencies and application files and whatever, but the hardware is virtualized. It uses the resources from that system or server. Now, what makes a container different is that they don't have a complete operating system. So the virtual machine has this guest operating system, the container doesn't. The container actually virtualizes the operating system. So it's actually just a process running. There's no hypervisor and no guest operating system. So instead of being ran as this guest operating system on an operating system, these containers get built into special packages called containers. And inside those containers, you build whatever you want from it. Now you might be like, what did he just say? This still makes no sense. Well, just remember this. A virtual machine has a complete operating system on it, and it virtualizes the hardware through this hypervisor. And a container just virtualizes the base operating system. And then in that container, you can build whatever you want. So what are the pros and cons? Well, a virtual machine, since it is a complete operating system, takes up more space, uses more resources, and it takes longer to boot up because you're booting up the operating system. Now, a container can boot up instantly in milliseconds because the operating system is virtualized and that container has everything in it it needs to run. And it's more portable, etc. Now, is one better than the other? No. They both have their perks, and one may be preferred over the other in different scenarios. A VM's not bad and a container's good. They're just different, and the situation calls for one or the other. All right, so that was a quick rundown. If you're still kind of confused, let's start building stuff, and I'll explain it better that way. All right, so the first thing you want to do is download Docker. Now, remember, Docker is just software for managing containers. That's all it is. Just go to docker.com. Go to Products and Docker Desktop. That'll take you to this page and just choose Download for Mac or Download for Windows. It'll ask you to create an account, I believe. You'll need to do that anyway because you'll have to sign into the app. And it's free and it's no reason why you shouldn't. So go ahead and set that up and install it and we'll continue on. All right, once you've done that, if you're on a Mac, you'll see this little boat icon up here in the top. Click on that and you'll see Docker Desktop is running. You probably don't have Kubernetes enabled, which you don't really need to. That's not what this video is about. But you can go to Preferences, and in Preferences, you can do stuff like Start Docker Desktop when you log in. I like to do that. You can allocate resources. So I think this is default, CPUs 2, memory 2, disk image size, 60 gigs, disk image location, things like that. Docker engine, you can configure the Docker daemon here, command line, experimental stuff, and Kubernetes information. So those are just preferences. I think you can probably leave them default for now. You'll also see a link to documentation in Docker Hub, which we'll talk about in a second, a dashboard, and then your repositories and Kubernetes information. So if you're on Windows, you won't see it up here in the top, of course. It'll be down here in the little taskbar at the bottom. It'll be a little boat icon there too, and you should see the same preferences. Basically the same. I think there's a couple of differences. So you've downloaded Docker, you're ready to roll. Let's talk about images. So a Docker image, if you recall, is just a blueprint. So it's a blueprint for how you build out an application, and then you run that blueprint to build the container. So when it comes to images, I'll show you a couple of things. Number one is a website called Docker Hub. This is Docker's official repository of images, and that's at hub.docker.com, or you can go to your app and just choose Docker Hub here. But it takes you to this page, and what this page has is official Docker images for everyday applications. So if you look down here, official images for Nginx, MongoDB, Node, Redis, images that aren't custom. These are images that you would include in building your application, but you wouldn't want to build yourself. Like, think about it. Redis is Redis, no matter what you do. You'll configure it differently, but it's just Redis. So if you need Redis with your application, you can just pull the image from here and then configure it. If you need Node, don't worry about setting up the Node version manager and all that stuff in your container. Just pull the image. Here's Postgres, here's Golang, here's HTTPD. Let's say I want a WordPress image. I just type in WordPress and it'll take me to the results, and always look for this official image. So here's the Docker official image for WordPress. So again, these are images that you don't need customized. You just need that piece of application added to your application. You would get it from Docker Hub. So that's great and everything, but in this video, I want to build a custom image based on an app. that I have or an app that you might have. And I want to show you how to do that. So a little while back, I created this simple React app called YouTube Stats. All it does is you input an ID, like a YouTube video ID, hit enter. It makes a call out to the YouTube API and returns all of the tags for that video and then some info right here, like channel title, video title, and the number of views. Really simple app. If you're interested in that, I'll put a link above if you want to build that out. It's a nice way to learn React basics. Anyway, so this is the app we're going to be building the image for today. So if you look at my code base, it's very simple. We have an index.html, we have some components, and all of that stuff that React comes with. So how do we take this app and build an image from it? Well, first off, let's get rid of this node modules folder because we're going to build that inside of the image. And I'm going to get rid of this build folder too. And I'll put a link to this app below so you can go to GitHub and download it and follow along with me. So the first thing we want to do is open up our app in a folder. So I have it here in VS Code. We have a folder called YouTube app. And what I'm going to do is inside of that folder, I'm going to create a new file called Docker file. So this technically could be anything, but conventionally people call it Docker file with a capital D. One thing that may help you along the way here is to go to Google and type in something like anatomy of a Docker file and find anatomy of a Docker file notes for myself from here. Something like that, somewhere that will list out to you the main parts of a Docker file. So we're going to be using that too. All right, the first thing in every Docker file is a base image. Think about it. You have this completely empty container that you're going to be building this app in. The very first thing you want is some kind of base image to run your app. Normally, this is like a Linux image, like Ubuntu or Debian or Alpine if you want it really small. So we just type, the first thing always starts with a from, and you see I have a VS Code extension that gives me kind of hints here. So it says from base image. Now, where do we get the base image? We don't want to build out Ubuntu or we don't want to build out Debian. Like, there's no point in doing that. Docker Hub already has it. So let's go to Docker Hub and type in, let's do Debian and see what they got. So they have the Debian image. Debian is a Linux distribution, blah, blah, blah. This is Docker's official image. So we can just use this because we just need the generic Debian image. If you come down here, it tells you what tags are available. So back in our Docker file, we can say from, and what do we call this image? If we look up here, it says Docker pool Debian. This image is just called Debian. So from Debian, colon, now you'll see here the colon and then there's the tag. So what version of Debian do we want? So let's come back and look around. There's Buster, which is I think Debian 10. Jesse is Debian 8. Then I think there's Stretch, which is Debian 9. Anyway, I'm going to grab this Buster 10 and just the latest. So I'm going to use the tag latest. From Debian colon latest. And that's the start of our Docker file. Now in this image, we're basically going to be adding the steps to run this app. So if you think about it, we got the Debian base. The next thing we need is the node runtime because React requires node, right? So again, we can go to Docker Hub for that. So come up here and type in node. Whoops. Let's see if they have an official node image, which they do. Right here, Node.js is a JavaScript platform. Blah, blah, and it's the official image. So click on that. Now, what's neat is if you scroll down to the bottom here, you'll see that it has a couple of different image variants. So there's node colon version, just like we did with Debian. So we did Debian colon latest. You do the same thing with node. This is the de facto image. And what's neat is that some of these tags may have names like Buster, Jesse, or Stretch in them. These are the sweet code names for the releases of Debian and indicate which release the image is based on. So what's really neat, this image here, node version, has an option to give you Debian or Alpine or whatever underneath it. You kind of knock out two birds with one stone. There's also a slim version that just has node, and then there's another version for Alpine. But what we want is to stick with Debian. So if we scroll back up, you'll see all these options here. And I'm just gonna say, hey, Stretch is a version of Debian, and they do have a latest. So I'm gonna use the latest tag for that too. So this node image has Debian baked into it. So I can just use that. So let's go back and change this to from node latest. And there we get the node runtime plus the base Linux image. All right, so we got our Linux base image. We have node ready. Next thing we want to do is copy all of these app files to our container. So let's go ahead and make a folder to put this in. So to run a command in Dockerfile, you simply just put run, and then you see right here, run command. So let's say run make dir, which is make directory. We're gonna call it app. So we're gonna have an app folder with a folder inside of it called source. That's where we're gonna be copying our app files to. Next, we wanna set the work directory. So we're gonna use this phrase called workdir, and we're gonna change that directory to, and you see right here, the absolute or relative path to use as the working directory. So that, of course, is gonna be app source. App source. So this just sets our working directory. All these commands that we run are gonna be run in this directory. All right, so what's the next step? So we've made this directory, we've made this our work directory. What's the next step in a React app? Well, it's gonna be the package.json. That's gonna have all of our dependencies. We're gonna have to run npm install. So let's go ahead and get that ready. So what we wanna do is we wanna copy, we haven't copied anything over yet, but we wanna copy that package.json. We wanna copy that to our work directory. And what we can do is we can say copy package.json to dot. Now, how can I do dot? Because the work directory is already defined. This dot says the current directory, which is going to be this. You can also say app.source. You can also do that, but you don't have to. You can just say dot. We've already set the work directory. So what that's going to do is that's going to copy this package.json, which has all of our dependencies here, which need to be installed with npm install. So we're going to copy the package.json there, and then we're going to run npm install. This is going to install our packages. So what we're doing is we're piecing together the way to run this app in a container. All right, so we've copied our package.json. We've run the npm install, so we have a node modules folder ready to roll. Next thing we need to do is copy our app to that folder, our entire app. We can simply do copy and see copy source to destination. So copy period, because we're already in the folder we want, copy all of this stuff to period. The source is the folder we're in, and the destination is the work directory, which is the period. Again, you can do app/source if you want to, but you don't have to. Copy dot to dot. That's the benefit of making this work directory. Then finally, React uses in development the port 3000. So there's another command called expose, and see right here, expose port. So expose 3000. That's going to expose our port in order to view our app in the browser. And then the final thing we need to do is run the command, which is npm start. So we can do cmd, look right here, cmd, and then there's these brackets with an executable inside of it. So let's do that. Let's set some brackets. And you have to separate these out. So we have to do npm and then a comma and then start. So if I want to add any more flags, I can do that. But npm start is all I need to do. And again, you're like, what is this run and copy and expose and command and all that stuff? Well, that's why I told you to look up this anatomy of a Docker file. It kind of explains it to you. So what does add? What does copy do? Sets the username. Here's environment variables. There's all kind of stuff. So I would look that up, type in the anatomy of a Docker file, and you'll get used to these commands pretty quick. Also, you can go to the Docker documentation. It's really good. So that's it. This will build our Docker image. We have our base Linux node set up. We make a directory. We set that directory. We copy the package JSON there, and we run that npm install to get our node module set up. We copy all of the app files to the container. And again, we're just copying this stuff to the container. We expose the port 3000, and then we run npm start. So this is our Docker file. I could take this whole folder, zip it up, and send it to somebody, and they could take this and build out the same image. So how do we build the image? Well, we use the Docker command line. So there's things you can do with the Docker command line. You can look that up. You can do something like Docker images to view all of your images. That shows me all the images on my computer. You can do Docker PS, I think, to show you what containers are running or what processes are running. You can do a lot. To build the image, we need to use Docker build. You can go to the Docker documentation and look that up, but basically it's Docker build, and then there's options. The most basic way to do this is to say Docker build, what directory do you want to build? What directory has your Docker file? Well, that's the directory we're currently in. So I can go Docker build, period, and build this image. But it's good practice to name your images, to tag your images. In order to do that, I would just add a -t in whatever I want to name the image. So let's name it YouTube React App. How about that? So docker build the folder, which is period, we're in the current folder, -t to tag it as YouTube React app, and just hit return. And we got an error, makedir cannot create directory, app source, no such file or directory. With makedir, we need to add the P flag, which creates the app and the source folder. I think that's going to solve it, so that's my bad. Let me save that again and try to run that command again. So you'll notice down here it shows different steps. So step 1 is this base node image. Step 2, we make the directory. Step 3, we assign the work directory. Step 4, copy the package JSON. 5, run npm install, which is happening as we speak. Now these different steps are layers. Remember I talked about Docker builds these images in layers? This is the example right here. The first layer is kind of the base. The second layer adds the app source folders and so forth. These layer on top of each other. Now if you ever get big Docker files that have a lot of run commands, you want to kind of concatenate those. So you want to run and then put all of the things you want to run into one line so it doesn't create so many layers, which makes a big Docker image. So if I did like a run yum install in like 50 packages, I wouldn't want to do 50 run commands. That would make 50 layers. I wouldn't want to run yum install and then put them all in line with one another. Just a hint. And this should be done in a minute. All right, so you see right here, I went through step 6. I did my npm install. Step 6, 7, 8. Again, these are different layers. Step 8, I run npm start and successfully built, successfully tagged. So it built my image. Here's my image ID. And my tag is YouTube React app latest. All right, so now I have my image. How do I find my image? Like, where's my image at? Well, you can do two things. You can do docker images. It's going to list out all the images on your computer. Since this is the newest, it's going to be at the top. So you see right here, YouTube React app, tag latest, image ID, here it is. Created 34 seconds ago. How big is it? It's a gig. It's a little over a gig. Not bad. But here's what I like to do, okay? There's lots of Docker commands you can run. But since I'm using VS Code, and again, I have a video about this that I did about a month ago about Docker being really easy with the VS Code extension. I'm going to show you how to use that. So basically, instead of typing in Docker images, I can come over to this. Well, let me show you the extension. In short, you just go to extensions and look for Docker. And you should find it says Docker. It's by Microsoft. It's got 4 million downloads. That's the extension that you want. So download that, and then you'll have this Docker icon to the left. So if I click that, I can see all of my containers. Let me kill this container. I can see all of my containers, all of my images, and all of my volumes and networks and all that good stuff. What I'm interested in here are my images. So you probably, if you're just starting with Docker, you probably don't have any of these. This is just stuff I was messing with earlier. But when it comes to images, what did we call it? We called it right here, YouTube React app latest. So let's find that. Here's YouTube React app, and you'll see my image right here, latest. So I don't need to worry about the command line. If I'm in VS Code, I can see everything visually here. And here's another shortcut. If you're in your Docker file, you can open up your command palette, which is Shift Command P on a Mac, and go type in Docker, and there's all kind of commands you can run. Look at all this stuff. Who needs a command line, right? Docker images, build image. So if I click that, it's going to say tag image as what? And I tagged it YouTube React app, latest, let's call it that. YouTube React app, latest. And all I got to do is hit enter. And I don't have to worry. And there it built it. Since everything is cached, it's the exact same as I built it last time, so nothing new. It built it pretty fast. Now, if I go up here, I can see the command that VS Code used. And if I scroll up here, I can actually see the command they use. So docker build, they use this rm flag, f flag, the directory, so YouTube apps / Docker file, and then they tagged it and so forth. So if you don't want to be like, what is it again? Docker build, and then I think I got to use the T flag. Instead of doing that, just open the command palette and just do Docker images, build image, boom. And then what do you want to name it? YouTube React app latest, or what do you want to tag it? And I just hit enter and boom, it built it again. So that's what I do. I rarely ever type out Docker commands. I'm in VS Code. I'm going to utilize what VS Code's given me. So that's a Docker image. This image is the blueprint that I run as a container. Again, I have my Docker file. I use the steps to build out my app inside of that container. Now, how do I run it? Well, let's get to containers. So over here, I have an image, and it's called YouTube React app. I open it up. I have one tag, the latest image. Now, I could say YouTube React app : 1.0 or something, and that would be another image under this. So how do I run it? Well, there's another command called docker run. Now there's more parameters to this, like port numbers and all of that stuff, but again, we're in VS Code. The quick way to do this is just to go to the image, right click, and go run. Just click on run, but I like to use run interactive because I like to see what's going on. And you just click run. Now watch this. I click run. Now here it is. So this image, this blueprint that I have is now going to run as a container. So starting the development server, like any React app, basically it just did an npm start. Compiled successfully. You can now view it at localhost :3000. Let's see if that works. Localhost 3000. There's my app running on a container. Now, how do I know that's on a container? Because I can come back up here to containers and I see YouTube React App latest running as a container. Now, a couple things to note here. First off, the command they used, let me run it again. Let me do run interactive. And then I'll kill it. Now look at this command. It's docker run, and then there's an RM flag and an IT flag. You can look that up. And then there's the port flag, so 3000 :3000 /TCP. And what this does is make ports available to services outside of Docker. So basically it says map this 3000 TCP port in the container to the port 3000 in the Docker host. So basically this port 3000 in the container is going to map to 3000 in the browser. And finally, the image name. So that's all it did. Just docker run, a couple of flags, some ports, and the image name. That's all it did, and it ran a container. Again, right click, run, and the container spins up again. Watch how fast this is. You'll see it pop up here, right there. That took what, maybe a second? All right, so here's our container up here. And if you open up another terminal somewhere, you can do a docker ps, and that'll show you which containers are running, and you see that YouTube React App latest is running. It's created 33 seconds ago. Its ports are 3000, as we set, and they made up a name. And here's our container ID. So you can get that info there. You can also get it here. Now there's some other things you can do in VS Code. You can right click and go to inspect, and it'll give you all kind of information about your container. You can do, you can restart it, you can stop it. You can view logs in case you want to know, hey, what's going on. You're running, like you're having some errors or something, you can run your log. Obviously there's no log here because I'm not doing anything with the app. One big one is attach shell. If you want to jump inside of your container into the command line, you do that. So attach shell, and then you come in here and it runs this docker exec command. That's another command. And so when you do that, it takes you to the work directory. So /app/source. That's where my files are. If I hit ls, I see all my files, my Docker file, my node modules, package, public, source, my 2 folders, all of that stuff. Great. So that's a Docker container. So we took this simple React app, we created a Docker file, which is the blueprint for the image. Once we have the image, we can run it whenever we want, over and over again if we want to. And it's going to produce the same exact container with the same files, blah, blah, blah. So I could zip up this whole thing, send it to somebody. They could build the image and run the exact same app with no problems. Also, I could push it up to Docker Hub, and they could just go there and do a Docker pull, YouTube React app, latest. All right, so the last thing I want to do is talk briefly about Docker Compose. So here's the issue. Let's say we want to build a WordPress container. Well, think about the pieces to WordPress. There's the WordPress files, there's PHP, there's Apache, some sort of server, or Nginx. There's also a database. So you would want to go to Docker Hub and be like, I want the MySQL database, which we can just grab from there because the database is a database. We can configure it on our end, but we just need that image. So we can grab MySQL from there. We can grab WordPress from there. That's another image. We can grab PHP from there. We can grab whatever we need. But here's the problem. Now we have multiple containers. How do we put together multiple containers? Oh, and also to add to that, we have our theme that we're actually developing. So how do we have all of these containers plus our own theme that we're going to containerize? How do we have all those talk to each other? And how much trouble is it to run? Well, that's where Docker Compose comes in. Docker Compose takes multiple containers and makes them run together as an application. Makes them talk to one another and network with one another. And Docker's made it really, really easy. All right, so the first thing we want to do, let's just create a folder on the desktop, and let's call it WordPress-Docker. I'm going to drag this into VS Code. And to use Docker Compose, we need to have a Docker Compose YAML file. So here in this folder, I'm going to right-click, choose New File, just choose docker-compose.yml. Now a YAML file is just a configuration file. It's kind of like JSON, but just a different format. It's used a lot in automation and deployment, things like Kubernetes and Ansible. You'll find it pretty easy. So we want to use Docker Compose to create our WordPress site. And the easiest way to demonstrate this is I'm just going to go to Google and type in Docker Compose WordPress and go to the actual Docker documentation. So Quick Start Compose in WordPress. I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to grab this example they have of this Docker Compose YAML file. I'm going to copy that and come down here and paste it. See if I can format it. Yeah, there we go. All right, so let's talk about this. This is the best way to understand it. Let's talk about this. So version, this is the Docker Compose version. It's on version 3. You don't have to worry about this. The main thing here is services. This is where you declare the services. So you got 5 images and you need them all to work together. You need to define the image, the networking, the volumes, all of that stuff. You would declare them as different services. Now, if you recall from earlier, WordPress already has PHP and Apache in it, the WordPress image, on Docker Hub. So all we need from there is just the database. We need the MySQL database. Well, we would go to Docker Hub and just type in MySQL, and that would show us the MySQL image, and that's all we want to do. We just want to pull that MySQL image, and they have that set up here for us. So they have the MySQL image, version 5.7 or tag 5.7. They've declared a database volume, the name of it being DB data, and the path is varlib MySQL. Restart always. This just assures that it restarts all the stopped and running services. And we have environment variables. So MySQL root password, database user, and password. You're familiar with this if you're familiar with MySQL. So that's it. We have this MySQL image. We have this DB service, which uses a MySQL image. It has a volume to store its data. It restarts every time. And it has environment variables. That's service number 1. Service number 2 is WordPress. WordPress depends on the database. We got to have that database to assure that WordPress runs properly. The image is WordPress latest. So this is from Docker Hub too. The official WordPress image with the tag of latest. Ports 8080, we talked about that earlier. So basically it maps this TCP port 80 in the container to port 8000 in the Docker host. So that means we can go to localhost 8000 to view our site. Restart always. Environment, here's some environment variables. So if you're familiar with WordPress, you got to have a database name, password, user, and host. And that's it. So we have 2 services in this Docker Compose file. Now there's one other thing here at the bottom, and this is volumes. Whenever you see volumes at the bottom outside of this services, so see these indentations. So services, that everything here falls under services, and then there's this volumes. Whenever it's separate down here, that means this DB data is available to all the services. If we just want a volume available to a service only, we would put that within that service. And we need to do that with WordPress. Think about it. If we're working on a theme and we're making some theme changes or we're adding plugins or things like that, we want to have a volume to save that stuff. So if we kill our container and start it back up, we want it to be able to pull that volume back up so that our site has the same files that it did before. So we want to declare another volume here. So we're going to put volumes and then 2 spaces. With YAML, it's 2 spaces always. Put a dash, and we're going to call this, now you see up here, they called this DB data. That's the name of the volume. What we want to do though, we don't want to just declare the volume in a path. We want to actually make this volume show up in our project so that we can edit the files. And to do that, it's really neat. If you go to the compose file documentation, you see different examples of volumes. So there's one of them here that says path on the host relative to the compose file. So we can use this // give our volume a name, and then have the path exposed locally in our project. So watch this. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So if I do // which means in this folder that we're currently in, and I type in WP content, that's the name of it, : and then what's my path to the WP content? Well, if you go to the WordPress image, let's see, WordPress, Docker image, you'll see where all of this is stored in your container. And by the way, there's always great documentation in Docker Hub if needed. So if you scroll down and kind of look around a little bit, you'll find out that themes go in a subdirectory var www html wp content themes. Plugins go in that same directory. So we want that directory. So var www html wp content. So let's punch that in. So var www html wp content. Whoops. Now what this is going to do is it's going to mount this volume here in our project, which will allow us, again, to edit our themes, plugins, all of that good stuff. So as soon as we run this Docker Compose file, it's going to create that WP content folder or volume here in our project. So I think we're all set. So how do we run Docker Compose? Well, it's simply, oh, and one more note. If you have a custom image that you built from a Docker file that you're also including in here, like you built an image and you want to include that image here, you can still have a Docker file in this that builds the image. You just include that image here in the Docker Compose. So to run this Docker Compose, we simply say docker-compose up. And there's another flag people often use, -d, which runs it detached from the terminal. So if I don't put this D, it's going to run all the processes here, and I can't do anything else in the terminal because it's being used. If I do a -d, it runs it as a background task, and I can still use my terminal here. So Docker Compose up -d, and I hit return. Now watch this volume pop up here. Awesome. WP content right there. And here it says created WordPress Docker DB1, that's a container, and creating WordPress Docker WordPress, that's a container. It also created a volume for our database. Remember, that's called DB data. And it created a network, WordPress Docker default. All right, and if I go over here to the Docker tab, I see that I have a WordPress container running and a MySQL container running. So a container per service. If I come down here to networks, I see the network and the volume, DB data. Great, so let's check this site out. Let me click on WordPress latest and choose open in browser. It should open it in localhost 8000. And here's my WordPress install. Let's set this up. Site title, I'm just going to call it Travis. Username Travis, password Travis. My email, discourage search engines, doesn't matter. All right, WordPress is installed. Let me sign in. And voila, here's our WordPress site. I can go to media, I can go to add new, upload some new file like this black background here. Great, so you see we have our file. Now let's check that this persists by stopping our container and starting it back, just to be sure our database volume and our WP content are persisting. So if we use Docker Compose up to spin up our containers, how do we spin them back down? Well, Docker Compose down. That's it. And watch this. Stopping this container and stopping this container. It stopped those containers and it removed the containers and it removed the network, but not the volume. So if we go back, we still have WP content. So if I start this again, Docker Compose up, detached. It's going to spin these back up. And I should still have that image file in my media folder. Open in browser. Go to WP admin, log in. Go to media, library, and there's my image. So the data persisted, WordPress is running, wonderful. And if you want to work on your theme, just open this WP content folder, say you're working on the 2020 theme, you make some kind of change, and let's try to make some quick CSS change. So let's find something we can change. Our site header has a background of white. Let's see if we can change that just to make sure that's working. Site header, background white, let's change it to black and save it. Now if we refresh, it should work. This tells us our theme and our volume is in the right place. There it is. We have a black background. So it looks like our WordPress site's working great. Docker Compose really is that simple. And perhaps this is a simple example, but you got to start somewhere. And I think it's a pretty good example. All right, so the final thing we want to do in this video is we want to deploy these two containers somewhere. Now, just a quick disclaimer, I probably wouldn't deploy either of these containers as they are, definitely not the WordPress container. The React app, maybe, because there's really no back end, it's just a front end, and it's just making API calls. Maybe I would do that. The WordPress container, I wouldn't. You wouldn't want to deploy a container, just one container, and then the database is also containerized. That's not really a stable solution. You would probably want that database on its own virtual machine, somewhere more stable than we have it currently. And then if you wanted high availability, you would probably want several virtual machines behind a load balancer for high availability and scaling and things like that. But, and here's where containers shine, you could set up a highly available cluster of containers. The only problem is containers can't really move like that by themselves. They need an orchestration tool like Kubernetes. So with Kubernetes, you can declare how you want your cluster to look and just deploy them out there into the mysterious world of Kubernetes. I think I'll do a video on that here in the next couple of weeks because that's very important. But for now, just a quick note, I probably wouldn't deploy either of these as they are in production. But I want to show you how to use Docker Hub, how to push images to Docker Hub, and then how to deploy. We're going to use DigitalOcean as the example. And I think you'll find some really helpful stuff here. So let's get started. First thing, let's check out this YouTube app. So I'm going to drag this into VS Code. And so what we want to do here is we want to push this image up to some kind of repository. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it up to Docker Hub, since we've been using that the whole time. That's the really popular one. So go to Docker Hub and sign into your account, and you get one free repository, one free private repository. So if you go to Docker Hub, the homepage, I'm signed in, but anyway, on the homepage, there's this big button that says Create Repository. Click on that, and it takes you to this page. Now, what you want to do is you want to name it. So I've already created one, but I would put something like YT React App for YouTube React App. Just some kind of name. It's got to be lowercase. I think it's got to be one word. So name it whatever you want. Put a description, and it's going to say you have 0 of 1 private repositories used. So choose private. And then you just simply want to create it. So click create. It'll create your repository, and then you'll end up on a screen like this. All right, here's my repository. It's called React App Docker. And there's a couple things to note here. One, there's only one tag. It's latest. You don't have a tag yet. You haven't pushed anything up. I have, because I wanted to save time. But I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But here's the thing to note. To push a new tag to this repository, you're going to use this, Docker push, and then your repository tag. Now, how do we do that? How do we push our image up to Docker Hub? Well, let me show you. Let's go back to VS Code. And here's what we want to do. First, we want to log into Docker Hub. You do that easily by saying Docker login, and then the U flag for username, and then your username. So mine is travis.media. And just hit enter. It'll ask you for a password. Go ahead and punch in your password, and it should say login successful. Yeah, login succeeded. Now I'm logged into Docker Hub, and I can tag my image. So if I go Docker images, I want to get this image ID. So let me find it. YouTube React App. This is what I want to send up to Docker Hub. So I'm going to grab, let me make sure I got the right line here. I'm going to grab this image ID right here and just copy that. And I want to type this in. I want to type in Docker tag and then the image ID. And then you want to type in whatever is here in the Docker command. So that's going to be travis.media React App Docker tag name, which is going to be latest. Or whatever you want to tag it. You can tag it 1.0.0 if you want. But I'm just going to paste that in. I'm going to change tag name to latest. And this is going to tag my image with this name. So hit return. Now that you've tagged it, all you have to do is put Docker push and then that tag name again. And of course, I need to change this to latest. So you tag it, and then you push it. And as soon as I hit return, it's going to start pushing this to Docker Hub. Now, I've already pushed it, so it's probably going to say layer already exists. So layer already exists. Yours is going to show you each layer is going to be pushed up to Docker Hub. So give it a few minutes to do that. Awesome, all done. Now, as soon as that's done, go back to Docker Hub and refresh, and you should see this tag here called latest, or whatever version you put. Congratulations, your image is now on Docker Hub. You can simply go docker pull in this right here, and you can have your image on your computer. You can tell your friend to do it. You can tell your company to do it, whatever. Docker pull this, that's all you got to do. It is available to whoever has access to this private repository. They also have public ones, but you got to pay for those. So let's talk about DigitalOcean. Say you wanted to put this React app on somewhere cheap, like $5 a month. That's what DigitalOcean's for. So let's go to digitalocean.com. I have a link below that I'm going to share with you that actually gives you $100 to use over a 60-day period. So you get $100 to try out whatever you want. It's lots of good stuff. So I'm going to sign into it. You probably have to create an account if you don't have an account already. And you have to create a project. I have this one that I'm using that I'm going to use again. And it's really cool. You create this droplet, which is a virtual machine. There's also a Kubernetes option. I think I'm going to do a video on this in the future. And there's other stuff, spaces and things like that. Really neat. So all you do is just create a new droplet. And instead of choosing this Ubuntu base or Fedora or something like that, go to Marketplace, because you want a Linux base, but you also want Docker already installed and set up. Well, the cool thing about DigitalOcean is they have all of these pre-built distributions and images and all this stuff that you can choose from. Like if you want Django, there's probably a pre-configured Django thing. Just click on the button and it'll install it and set it all up for you. But what I want to do is I want to come to Marketplace and type in Docker. Whoops, not CyberPanel. What is that? Docker. Click Docker, and let's get some details on it. So what this Docker image does is it gives you Docker, so you don't have to worry about setting that up on your droplet. But it also gives you, look at this. It also gives you the OS of Ubuntu 18.04. Really cool. So you get the base Linux plus Docker already set up for you. So I'm going to choose that. And then it says choose a plan. They try to kind of sway you into picking this $40 option. Never do that. Go down to show all plans and just choose the $5 a month option. And by the way, you only pay for your droplet when it runs. So you can build this up and then kill it real quick and only pay for like, you know, if it's 0.007 cent an hour, it's pretty affordable. So choose that. Scroll down to, you don't need any block storage. Choose a data center near you. I'm going to choose New York. Select additional options, no additional options. SSH keys. So you can do a one-time password if you want, but it's a good idea to upload your SSH keys to DigitalOcean. That way you can authenticate easily. If you come up here to your profile, you should be able to go to account and SSH keys. You can just add, I think, your public key there. So I already have it, so I'm going to choose MacBook SSH because I have it set up on my MacBook. Droplets, I just want one droplet. You can choose a host name. How about we call this Docker Tutorial VM? And add tags, select project. I'm going to select this mezzanine project. And that's it. That's all you got to do, and click Create Droplet. It'll take maybe 30 seconds to create. And while you're doing that, check out some of this stuff. So you can have managed databases. You can spin up a load balancer. You can do all kind of, you can take snapshots. It's really neat. It's a nice alternative to the other cloud computing options like Amazon and Azure and stuff. And it's really cheap, $5 a month. I think Kubernetes starts at $10 a month. Really cool. Lots of great documentation too. Now, once this is done, you get this IP address here. You can select copy and then open up a terminal. So I'm going to open up iTerm. And to SSH into this, if you have a Mac, if you have Windows, you're going to have to do some other stuff. I like to use a program called MOBA Xterm, MOBAXTERM. It's like way better than PuTTY if you're on Windows. But if you're on Mac, you're good to go. So what you want to do is just SSH, and then I'm going to use root. Actually, I think you have to start with root anyway, the first time you get into your droplet. Root at, and then your IP address. I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to SSH us into this droplet. And if you provided your SSH key and that talked to your private one on your system, then you should be good. And it should say, are you sure you want to continue connecting? Yes, I'm sure. And then it's going to say enter your passphrase, and I'm going to do that. And I don't really have time to go into setting up SSH keys. I can do separate videos if you need me to, or if you have problems with this, just leave me a comment or send me an email or something. But I'm going to move on here because I'm assuming you know how to SSH and the stuff. So I'm logged in here as root. Now the first thing you really want to do is you want to change your user. You want to set up a new user. set some SSH keys up with that user and use that and then disable root. That's the safe thing to do. I'm not going to do it to save time. I'm just going to use root. Now, if you run Docker, you'll see that, hey, guess what? Docker's already installed. Great. So remember our Docker Hub image here? Docker push. What we can do is just grab this, copy it, and we can say simply Docker pull, and we punch that in. We change this tag name to latest and hit enter. And hey, error. You know why? Because we got to log into Docker. So remember how to do that? Docker login, you, and then your username. And then it's going to ask you for your password. You punch in your password. And that's incorrect. Let's try that again. Login succeeded. Now I should be able to do it. So go back to Docker pull. I'm going to pull my image. And here we go. It's downloading all of those layers from my image. Now, while this is going on, what do you think we need to do next? Well, we have our image. What do we do when we have our image? Well, we simply run it. And that will spin up our container. All right, cool. So if we go Docker images, we'll see that we now have this image in our Docker repository on this droplet called travis.media react app docker. It has the tag of latest. It was created, it says 26 hours ago. Yeah, I guess when I actually created the image, that was yesterday. It makes sense. And the size is 1.16 gig. All right, now that's done, how do we spin up the container? Well, with Docker run. We have our image, we run our image, and that spins up our container. So we do that with Docker run. I'm going to put some flags in here. RM, IT for the interactive. And then we need to specify the ports, which I think is 3000 TCP. And the name of our image was travis.media / react app docker. React app docker tagged latest. All right, that's all we do. And if I hit enter, our container should now spin up. You see that? React script start, starting the development server. And just a note, you would want to not start the development server, but a production server. All right, so it says you can now view YouTube app in the browser. The port is 3000, so let's jump back over to our project. Let's copy this IP address, go to a new tab, paste that in, :3000, and we should have our app. Bam! There's our app running in a container. So if I go to YouTube real quick and grab some video ID and hit enter, there it is. Our app works great. Now, of course, if you wanted to take your app serious, you would set up some DNS records and point it to your domain, or point your domain to this, and not have this IP address. But right now, we're just taking the simple and easy route. So that's the React app. So let's jump over to the WordPress app. Now let's open up this WordPress Docker. So this was our WordPress project we were working on. And remember, this is with Docker Compose. So there's a number of ways you could do this. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use some other kind of visual aid. Because remember, we have this WP content folder that we want to be able to develop with. And so we're actually going to copy this Docker Compose to a folder. And then we're going to run it, and it's going to create a WP content there that we can pull down and work with and upload and stuff. So I'm going to use a FTP client called CyberDuck. Such a cool name. And I'm going to create a new bookmark here. And so I'm going to click this. It's going to be SFTP. And what is my IP address again? Let me copy that. And all we're doing here, instead of SSHing in and using the command line, we're going to use this FTP client. It makes it a little easier. So edit this bookmark, which I thought I was doing anyway. The server is going to be this IP address. My username is going to be root. Again, don't do this. Create a separate user. My password is going to be something. And my SSH private key is found in its normal place on my computer to validate with. And I have to punch in my password again. And that's it. And it saves it. There's no save button, so I just click out of this. And now if I double click it, I should be able to jump into my droplet. Unknown fingerprint, it's okay, allow it. It asks me for my password again. And there it is. Now since I'm root, I'm in my root folder. I don't want to be in my root folder, so go back out to the main directory. And I'm going to just make one in this home directory. This is usually where the user folder is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this Docker Compose in the Finder. And I'm just going to drag it in. So Docker Compose, drag it right there into the home folder. Awesome. And it's this simple. So let me go back to my terminal. And let me go to my home folder. If I do an ls, there's Docker Compose YAML. Actually, I want to make a directory here called WordPress. And I want to move, whoops. And I want to move Docker Compose YAML to WordPress. WordPress. All right, cool. So that's in the WordPress folder. That's a little better. So if I refresh this, there it is. There's my WordPress folder. So as you recall, all we did was Docker Compose up. And we have our Compose file. Remember, it pulls from Docker Hub, the WordPress latest. And it pulls from Docker Hub MySQL. And so it does all the work for us. So if you wanted to work on this site, you would just simply put Docker Compose up. And I'm going to detach it, hit return, and it's going to go and pull these images because it doesn't have it currently. So it's pulling from the MySQL library. Here's all of the layers for MySQL. And here it is pulling from the WordPress repository in Docker Hub. Voila. So it created my two containers, the database container and the WordPress container. Now what's really neat is that if we go to CyberDuck now, and we go into this folder, we should now have the WP content folder. Remember, we made that a local volume. So it's going to grab whatever is in that WP content folder and mount it right here in my directory. And what's neat about this is that you can take this WP content folder, drag it right down to your desktop, and spin up a WordPress instance and just work on it. So you can pull WP content into VS Code, you can build out your theme, you can make a whole bunch of changes, and then you can just drag it back up here onto your droplet and just run Docker Compose down and then Docker Compose up, and you'll see your changes. Actually, you probably don't even have to do that. You could probably just refresh. Now let's check this out. It should be running in, was it port 8000? So let's see if that worked. So let's come here and copy this IP address, 8000. Great. Site title, Travis, username, Travis, password, Travis, confirm password, email, whatever, discourage search engines, install WordPress. Now, if you wanted to share this with friends, again, it's really easy. You just give them this WP content folder in this Docker Compose file. And of course, there's the database. You may want to export the database. I'm not quite sure up front how that's handled. I'd have to look into it a little bit. But it's great for development. You see the benefits of these Docker containers for development. Now with production, again, you need some orchestration tool to really get the benefit out of it. Otherwise, you want to be on a stable VM or a couple of VMs, especially with the database. So it says success, WordPress has been installed. Wonderful, let's log in, make sure it works. So Travis, click login. And there it is, there's my WordPress site. Again, you would want to point your DNS records here so you could have a real domain, not this IP address. But there's my site, and it's running on DigitalOcean in a container. So hopefully that was helpful. This, again, doesn't cover everything with Docker, of course, but these are the things I wanted to know when I was first starting as kind of a high-level overview. Give me the definitions, show me how to do it, show me how to deploy it. Let me get that much down, then I can move on to something like Kubernetes. So if you like this, hit that like button. Leave me a comment if you got questions. Consider hitting that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.